Alright, we're out down below the shop today, and I just wanted to do a real quick video on the excavator purchase that I made in the previous videos. I've done a lot of work with it. I'm going to kind of show you that real quick. And this pretty much is like if you're planning on buying a used excavator or even a new excavator for around the house work, this is kind of what to expect, kind of what you can do, and some tips and tricks on keeping the thing running. So one of the early on projects is right out here. I basically regraded that and cut all the trees and woods down that were out, mainly because I could see off the deck out into the valley, and that's grown up. It looks really nice. It's easy to mow. Did that in about 2 weekends with the excavator, 2 tanks of fuel. So with that one project there, I basically almost made my money back on my initial investment of it, just in rental fees, because rental fees run about, you can figure 60 an hour is a good number to look at for this size excavator. So that one weekend, pretty much I ran for 12 to 14 hours continuously at my own pace. And that's another thing I'll say is, when you're renting a piece of equipment, you have to do it then. You get it a specific amount of time, and there's an hour limit, but then you have to have them come back and get it. So for a lot of projects, I've been able to space out when I had time to do it. But it turned out great, and that was one of the first projects that I did. The very next project that I did is I actually built a road. I recently cleaned this out, but I had built this road initially right after I got that done. So now I have access to the back side of the property, which is really nice. It's not necessarily something I would drive the truck on, but I can drive the tractor or the razor or what have you on it. And it makes it really easy to kind of keep this cleaned off, where I don't have a lot of big tall trees growing. Every so often I basically went through here and pulled any big overgrowth on, and trying to keep grass growing. Okay, so another thing that I did is I basically widened out the pad for my fifth wheel, and don't really have a before or after, but you can kind of see this is relatively recently done, and this is basically, I have enough room to almost park 2. I redid the far end out there so that I can actually come down with the fifth wheel and make one turn and back this in one motion, which has really changed the dynamic. If you've ever been camping, that's one of the times you're the most tired. Get back, you kind of just really want to just get parked and get unhooked. And that really was a game changer for me. And I did all that mainly with the excavator. A lot of the fine grading I did with a Massey Ferguson tractor. This was probably, I would say, maybe 60 hours operating the excavator to get this pulled out and regraded. And I had a video where I actually did this pad. So this pad's almost twice as wide as it was before, which has been really nice. Alright, so here's the excavator that I purchased. I think I'm getting pretty close to probably having this for a complete year. Really haven't had any big, huge problems with it. It's never really broken down to the point where I couldn't finish the work. I did add this thumb. I have a video on that. That right there is the one thing that you want to get. If you're going to get a mini excavator this size or anything bigger, the thumb is probably used just as much as it is used for digging. The only downside, and I'm trying to rectify that at the moment, trying to find a bucket manufacturer that's close to me. This bucket is just a little bit too narrow for most of what I'm wanting to do. You can put up to a 24-inch bucket on this particular machine, but I do have the quick attach. So that's another thing you probably want to get. And ideally you want a small bucket, a 2-foot bucket, and maybe even a grading bucket. And at some point I may be looking at doing that. I finished a lot of my projects. I don't know that I'll invest the money in it, but the thumb was worth it. That was one of the first things that I did to the excavator. That's worked great. Like I say, this thing was not, this is a used excavator. I got it for the right price. And really the only things I've done to it is a little bit of undercarriage work. Not super expensive. I think I've got maybe $600 and a couple of rollers. And that was mainly because it probably sit for a really long time and wasn't moving, and a couple of them rusted up. The other thing that I did that made the most difference in grading is I actually put a new cutting edge on this blade. One thing I'll say, if you're going to buy a used excavator, if you look here and don't see this edge coming down below what's called the frog of the blade, replace that edge. That kind of changes the game, because if you don't, you're actually riding, when you set the blade down, you're riding on this frog, and it's not really going to cut dirt like it normally would, and in dragging operations it doesn't finish grade as nice as it could if you have a new cutting edge. And these things are so cheap. I think the cutting edge is maybe like 150 bucks and about 15-20 minutes of welding if you've got a nice big MIG welder. And that has been a game changer for grading operations with this. One thing I'll say is, if you have a piece of equipment, excavators are really good about being durable pieces of equipment. And what that basically means is, really they're simple devices. So they've got a motor, a hydraulic pump, pilot controls, and maybe a pilot pump. And you have hoses and cylinders. So you don't have any like metal to metal per se, gearboxes, stuff like that. The only real gearing and stuff, something you have to maintain, are these track motors. You want to make sure that they're not leaking, and you want to change the fluid pretty often, which I do on this. It's really easy. There's basically a fill hole and a drain hole. John Deere, I really like John Deere, because if you look up in almost every one of these I've seen, you have this big diagram of everything, fluid capacities and fluids. It's right on the machine and it's accessible. The only downside that I don't really like about this machine, this is probably any zero turn or zero clearance. Basically, this doesn't stick out past the tracks. These things are so compact that if you do have to work on something or change a hose, it's very hard. So like right now I have, I think I have a fitting underneath here that's leaking. I think whoever had this before me, I think changed some hoses out, and they're brand new. That's these here. So they go underneath and connect to a manifold, but it's buried deep in here. And I've taken it off once to tighten one, and now I've got another one leaking. But it takes a little while. And if you watch my other video, the other issue that I had with it was the throttle cable. It didn't happen while I was running, and it happened one day I came down to knock out a project and couldn't get the throttle to come up. Well, it was the throttle cable. And ended up basically have to disassembling the machine, which is not, terribly hard as long as you got some tools, but it takes a lot of time. It took probably just about all day to pull all this off, disconnect everything underneath here and peel everything out of the way. I had to pull the seat out, the bracket underneath, and basically I kind of saved myself some time, because that throttle cable actually comes across here, up, and then back over to the engine. So that means that a lot of this had to come out, and I basically had to feed a wire. So I used the old throttle cable to pull the wire back through. Otherwise I'd have to take off a lot more. If you're buying a used machine, the big thing to look for obviously is pin play. This machine had quite a bit up there, but when I put the thumb on, I went ahead and got pins for the front, and that's really tight now. Sometimes the blade pins, because those are a little hard to grease and people forget to grease them. On this machine, they're fairly tight. The other thing is the undercarriage, and a lot of people wonder how to check undercarriage. And it's really easy. Basically, the machine will lift the whole side of the excavator up, so you can basically check any of the undercarriage you need to. Things you're looking for are really sharp, pointy looking, worn chain links on the actual track. These tracks are fairly old. They need to be replaced. But for me, they'll last a really long time. But the sprockets, you want to look at those, see what the engagement looks like. And there's usually track rollers along the bottom. There's a front idler. Just to kind of give you the idea on this machine, for a rear track motor, you're looking at probably 2,500 bucks. So you want to take really good care of those track rotors. The sprockets are not super expensive; that are under 100 bucks. The idler up front, if you buy the whole assembly, they're 500 to 600. And each one of the little rollers underneath is around 100, and the top idler, which is a roller right here, is about 150-ish. All of that stuff you can do yourself, mainly because you basically have a built-in jack for the machine. It's really easy to change anything on this. If you need to take the track off, you basically, on almost every excavator, it's going to have a grease fitting for basically pressurizing that front roller to go forward. So on this machine it presses forward. You take that grease fitting off, put the bucket against that front idler and pull, and it'll push all the grease out and it loosens up the track. This may give you a better shot of it. As you can kind of see one of those bottom rollers there. And then this is the upper roller. So in through this hole, I don't know if it's going to come in on camera, but into that hole there's grease fitting that you can actually unloosen. You basically screw it loose and let the grease come out, and you can remove this entire track assembly and replace anything you want to on it. It's actually really quick. The rollers, you know, maybe an hour. One side I replaced all the rollers. That side over there I replaced 2 rollers, and they come pre-assembled. If your bolts are wore, make sure that you get the size bolts. All the bolts here that I replaced are all metric. I was able to get those at Napa. As far as hoses go, you want to make sure that you have an equipment vendor that can make these. I don't really recommend ordering these necessarily from the manufacturer. They're really expensive and typically they don't have them in stock. But Napa Auto Parts and several other places, at least around here, you can basically take the old hose to them. They can match up the diameter of the hose and the pressure rating, and then put whatever fittings that you need. And sometimes I have to put a fitting and an adapter to get your hoses. But right now this machine is in really good shape as far as pretty much everything on it. It always starts, it always runs. The only thing I may need to do in the near future is a water pump. Get a little squeak every once in a while when it's cold, crank it up. That doesn't look too bad. I've already priced one out. Used, or not used, but in the aftermarket water pump section, it's got an Isuzu engine. Those are about 180, figure about 230, including shipping and getting a gasket. One thing on the machine that you definitely want to get, especially if you're going to do a thumb, and I'm thinking about later about actually getting a brush cutter for the front, is make sure that the machine that you buy is equipped. This one has auxiliary hydraulics with either full flow, like to operate a motor, which would be the cutter, and then dual bidirectional control. So I basically turn this nut that's right here, and it basically changes the mode so that I can operate a thumb, which is bidirectional, or a full flow device, which is like a cutter or a hammer or something like that. Another thing to always check, especially if you notice some leaks, is this particular machine has a really nice sight glass that you can look in. Get in the habit of looking at that every time you get in the machine. Check the oil every time you get in the machine. The biggest thing that I've seen with especially mini excavators, especially if there's, you know, some things wrong with the lights or controls up in the dash, is the overheating. So always make sure that your heating system's working. Make sure that your gauge and your alarm actually works when buying a used one, because that's been the number one thing. Usually that, you know, if it overheats a couple of times, it usually destroys the engine. You'll see some blowback and etc. But all in all, this has been a really good purchase. I've definitely already made the money back on my machine with the work that I've got done. And more importantly, I still have the machine after the investment to continue. You know, I can keep stuff clean and keep everything the way that I want it. So you can kind of see here, I've got the backhoe for the Massey. It's not been on the Massey in a while. I still do use the tractor quite a bit, but not for backhoe operations. This is way more efficient, and it's way more efficient to have the tractor kind of set up for grading and have that backhoe attachment off, because I can put the box blade or bush hog or whatever on a lot quicker, and then I pretty much exclusively use this for any kind of digging operations. Anyway, I hope this helps some folks out. If you're thinking about buying a used excavator or even a new one, that's kind of, you know, what you're in for the most part. Other than like wear items, my particular machine had a decent bucket, the teeth were in good shape. Those are things that will improve your efficiency digging, just like this new cutting edge. But if you have any questions, drop me a line down below. Be sure to subscribe, be sure to like, and we'll see you on the next one.